Welcome back to Africa This Week. Well, in this part of the program, we review a survey of South Africa's banking sector, growth strategies for CEOs, as well as wealth management for the high net worth individual. South Africans want the country's banks to treat them like valued customers. Others asked for a return to good old one-on-one service, the slashing of excessively high bank fees and high tech to be tempered by human touch. This according to the Speak Up report, an insight study that asked South Africans to help re-image banking. Clive Pillay, the country's banking ombudsman, and Tami Bolani, chairman of the National Consumer Forum, explained.
The findings in the report is very consonant with what I find in my office, so it's not much of a surprise to me.
Right. Any things that stood up for you?
Well, there are two fundamental complaints in the survey, to my understanding. One is the charge that fees are too high, and secondly, the fact that customers want to be treated better. Without
the high machines and stuff.
Yes.
Of course, the machines we do know for the banks, it helps them reduce costs and help fatten their margins. But let me come to you, Tami. From where you sit, any surprises here?
No, I agree with Clive.
Yeah.
There are no real surprises here. This is a confirmation of what we've known for many years.
Right.
And most of the problems that were highlighted in this survey were also highlighted by the Jolly Commission way back in 2007, 2008.
Right.
We've had these problems for quite some time. The problem is that we're not addressing them, and this is affecting our consumers quite negatively. The other issue also that is important to point out is that most of these problems are happening because we don't have proper competition in the banking sector. We need to introduce proper competition so that consumers can have a real choice.
I'm actually going to throw this back at you two gentlemen, because you are the ones who are consumer advocates. You do adjudicate on consumer complaints, but in part your role is to ensure that consumers are getting a fair deal. The fact that we've got this complaint on the high banking fees and the lack of proper service from the banks so many years after the first complaints were made suggests that perhaps your offices need to look at yourselves here. Can I begin with you, Tam? Okay. Are you failing?
Look, there are a few things that need to be done. One is financial education. I don't think we're doing enough. I'm talking about all stakeholders, government, consumer groups, Clive Pillay's office. We need to do more to make sure that consumers are able to manage their finances better. Two, I think we need to get back to the Jolly report and make sure that we implement the recommendations of that Jolly report. Right. If we don't implement those recommendations, we'll never be able to solve some of the problems that we're facing.
Are we unable to tackle the banks and make them do the recommendations, implement the recommendations that have been on the table for so long?
I think government has the capacity to tackle these issues. I think the problem is that
government has not
banks
done it. I'm finishing
a very powerful lobby group, and they're able to prevent government from taking action.
Clive, from your side?
Look, Godfrey, I'm not a consumer advocate. My office is an independent office. And my mandate is to adjudicate disputes between banks and their customers. And we do that independently, impartially, confidentially, and speedily. So that's my mandate.
Right. Given the number of complaints that keep coming to your office, then where does the fault lie? Because why should we keep on talking about the same things year in, year out?
Well, there are a number of factors that impact on what is perceived to be high bank charges.
Perceived?
Well,
you're choosing your words carefully.
Well, it's not always a minefield that a lot of consumers think.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, there are a number of factors that impact on bank fees and bank charges.
Right.
And it's the collective impact of all of those factors that tend to keep prices comparatively high.
Right. Again, when you compare against international peers.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the other findings. One of the findings is that, customers want to be spoken to in their local languages. Why is that such a problem for the banks?
No, I don't think that's a problem. I think all banks have, to a lesser or greater extent, the capacity to communicate with a consumer in a language of his or her choice. I don't think that's a major issue.
Anxiety-ridden CEOs around the world are sitting on millions in cash stockpiles. Too focused on internal efficiencies, they are unable to deliver innovative and profitable growth strategies. This is the view of Michael Raynor, Strategy and Operations Director at Deloitte in the US, and the author of the Innovators Manifesto.
The cash stockpile phenomenon is a global one. I don't think that's unique to South Africa. It's something that you see in large corporates pretty much around the world, as far as I can tell. My take on it is that essentially what's happened is that the indisputable macroeconomic uncertainty that continues to sort of pervade the global economy is something that has started to really poison, skew, color, cause us to misconstrue the opportunities that I think are manifold and manifest at a microeconomic level. I think if you look at the growth rates still in China and in Africa and in many of the emerging economies around the world, there is strong growth in the real economy. It's important to remember that the macroeconomic uncertainty has been a phenomenon of the financial economy. The real economy, I think, is robust. Right. And if we look at it the right way, I think that we can see enormous opportunities for growth. So I'm actually quite optimistic.
So how do we unlock then, or get this cash that's sitting on these balance sheets to start actually actively working for the population at large and help in creating the jobs that we need, particularly here in Africa, where we know that requirement is perhaps greater than in the US, where you guys complain about unemployment of 8.5%, and say, oh, we've got a national catastrophe here.
Well, I think that's a great question, and you pointed up an important point, which is that in many instances these things are relative, right? 7.5% growth in China is considered a hard landing.
Sure.
So all of these things are relative, and it's important to keep that in mind.
Sure.
So my take on it is that the opportunities that lie before us are very often invisible when we look at them using traditional approaches to identifying growth markets. We tend to look for big growing markets where there are lots of people with lots of money to spend. Yeah. And when you go look at those markets today, those people aren't spending. And those markets are actually treading water in many instances at best. Curiously enough, the opportunities that are structurally more attractive are going after the markets that don't yet exist. And so a completely different toolkit exists for identifying and exploiting those opportunities.
Now, one of the solutions, in fact, your main solution, if I look through the books that you've written, your main solution is innovation. How do we get corporates to innovate? How do you persuade a CEO to say, don't go for the easy answer, which is your acquisition? In fact, think different.
Right. Well, we've coined a term, it's called disruptive innovation. This is a particular approach to innovation that was discovered by a colleague and friend of mine, a fellow named Clayton Christensen in the US, and I've had the opportunity to work with him on a number of projects. And it's the topic of my latest book as well. Disruptive innovations are innovations that target the needs of markets that are just beginning to emerge. It's not about taking first world technologies, the most advanced solutions, and finding ways to shoehorn them into the needs of a market for which they weren't developed. It's about creating solutions that are optimized for the needs of those consumers, but then riding the technological improvements that seem inevitably to flow, so that ultimately they become the standard for solutions around the world. So whether it's distributed generation and electricity, whether it's online education, whether it's automated medicine, those are solutions that don't crop up in first world hospitals. Those are solutions that are created to solve needs unique to emerging markets, but then become globally dominant.
But that's a difficult thing, isn't it? Because you have to see where there isn't. In other words, you have to create the vision. And how do you get CEOs to think like that?
Well, the good news is we actually have identified the necessary, and I won't say necessary and sufficient, but very close to the necessary and sufficient conditions for identifying disruptive innovations successfully. The Innovators Manifesto book that you mentioned earlier presents experimental data that shows that when you apply a set of, it's a very small set of rules, it's two or three questions, and when you apply those questions systematically to opportunities at the earliest stages of their development, I'm talking about things when they are an idea, not a prototype, not an early market, that they are systematically more likely to succeed. Now, there's no guarantees, right? I mean, if I could predict successful innovations with 100% accuracy, I wouldn't do this for a living.
South Africa's growing population of the $71,000 millionaires will grow to a whopping 250,000 millionaires in the next 5 years. Wealth managers are seeking to position the industry to be able to provide a value service to meet their discerning but also demanding high-net individual.
The South African Luxury Wealth Summit was held in Sandton with the aim to redefine Africa's notion of luxury. Items ranged from a $7,000 watch to a $1 million property to cater to the South Africa's 71,000 US dollar millionaires.
The summit actually brings together the best brains, I suppose, of the luxury world, and be it from the financial sector, be it from design, be it from the luxury accommodation area of the world. There hasn't been a summit that has actually pulled people together and explain why.
With wealth management as one of the key factors of the summit, private investment proves as a lucrative way to harness these pockets of wealth.
In essence, Sanlam Private Investments manages 61 billion rands worth of funds in South Africa, about 120 billion globally. And the essence of that is that we add value through a bespoke solution in terms of our clients, offering them the solution that fits them in terms of a South African operation or alternatively a global operation. So that's the way we do it. It's a bespoke offering, and that covers the entire spectrum of investments available in the market.
While the rich and wealthy are considered to be people with demanding tastes, companies are developing innovative ways to provide value-added services.
At Pam Golding Properties, our target market is the whole spectrum. It's the whole audience from low-end housing to high-end. Obviously, today we're focusing on the luxury, and with regards specifically to the luxury market, we cater nationwide. Whether it be game farms, whether it be wine estates, whether it be hunting lodges, or whether it be some of the top-end houses in Atlantic Seaboard in Cape Town, or up here in Sandton and Johannesburg. That is our market we aim to please.
Although the targeted market is familiar with the finer things in life, they are not oblivious to those who need a helping hand.
You have to say, well, people are spending money on certain things which they want to buy, which they want to have for a certain lifestyle. And on the other hand, people who have money, lots of them really want to spend money on things doing good. Emerging markets as well will say, well, I'm earning good money, but I want to give something back to the community as well. And that's where we try to engage as well and really make people do something and give them the opportunity to see both sides.
Local suppliers and designers are also able to contribute to the growth of the African market. Okay. Now, what has the experience been like, with launching a homegrown luxury brand in South Africa?
It's been fascinating. It's taken about 3 years to get to this point. It can be difficult, and I think that's why you see a lot of African manufacturers sort of keeping their production lines in-house. But that's also great because you have the opportunity to sort of give people a chance to do hand-skilled work and really go back to the sort of idea of making things and job creation.
With the number of millionaires being estimated to grow up to 250,000 over the next few years, it is not just about how this niche market makes their wealth, but also how they spend it. Tubisha Machanyele, CNBC Africa.
Well, that's all for this edition of Africa This Week. Join us again next week for another roundup of the top stories in Africa.